There are going to be a lot of Hong Kongers moving to the UK soon.
The Prime Minister and the government are crystal clear. The United Kingdom will keep its word. We will live up to our responsibilities to the people of Hong Kong.
Yes, as soon as 2021 drops, there are going to be a lot of Hong Kongers moving to the UK. And it's because of this, the B&O passport. So here's my British passport. This is a passport that denotes I'm a full citizen of the UK. I have all the rights that come with being a British citizen. I can live there, I can work there, I can vote, I can go work in the European Union. Wait a minute, maybe not now. Hong Kongers get this passport. It's the British National Overseas Passport. The B&O passport gives Hong Kongers the right to stay in the UK visa-free for up to 6 months. That's it really. They can't work in the UK, they can't live there permanently. Oh, but they do get British consular assistance if they run into any trouble whilst travelling overseas in another country. But other than that, it's a pretty useless and expensive document. The B&O passport was Britain's half-assed attempt to ease the fears of Hong Kongers in the run-up to the handover of the territory to China in 1997. It was offered to anyone born before the 1997 handover. But in January 2021, the rights of the B&O passport will change.
I can now confirm we will proceed to honour our commitment to change the arrangements for those holding B&O status. We will grant B&Os 5 years limited leave to remain with the right to work or study. After these 5 years, they'll be able to apply for settled status. And after a further 12 months with settled status, they will be able to apply for citizenship.
Yes, in response to the increasing clampdown of Hong Kong from Beijing, the British government has decided to change the rules on the B&O passport. From the 31st of January 2021, Hong Kongers holding this B&O passport can live, study and work in the UK. And then, after 5 years, can apply for settled status and then apply to become a British citizen. But who are these Hong Kongers moving to the UK? How many of them will there be? How is this going to change the UK? A recent survey from Hong Kongers in Britain found that over 600,000 Hong Kongers were looking to move to the UK in the next 3 years. A total of 1 million people could move in the next 5 years. Now, this already sounds like a large number, but let's give you some more perspective on how large this number is. Hong Kong has a population of 7.4 million. So 1 million people is 13.5% of the city's population. That's a pretty sizable percentage of the city's population. Currently, the UK has 433,000 British citizens of Chinese descent. That's 0.7% of the UK's population. We're not a particularly big community in the UK, unfortunately. If 1 million Hong Kongers do arrive in the UK over the next 5 years, that would effectively more than triple the size of the Chinese population in the UK, although we would still be smaller in numbers than the South Asian community and the black community in the UK. The current British Chinese community in the UK is made up of mostly Hong Kongers or descendants of Hong Kongers who moved to the UK in the 1960s and the 1970s. They were working class, low-skilled Hong Kongers from the rural villages of the new territories. Most arrived in Britain to work in low-skilled jobs, often in the Chinese community, before setting up their own Chinese takeaway or restaurant. British people, if there is a Chinese takeaway you get your Chinese food fix from, it's likely being run by Hong Kong immigrants who moved to the UK in the 1960s or the 1970s.
Like so many villages in the new territories, Britain's takeaway Chinese restaurants have taken away most of the sons of this village.
Most of the Hong Kongers who are now upping sticks to the UK are of an entirely different demographic. They are mostly middle-class, educated, white-collar professionals or families who speak a very good level of English. And just an FYI, it's hard to get a good white-collar job here in Hong Kong if your English isn't of a good standard. These Hong Kongers are the typical demographic that support the protests and are pro-democracy. They are politically moderate. They are the peaceful majority who attended some of the huge pro-democracy marches in Hong Kong. Most are likely to be highly skilled and will hold some money in savings or property or some other assets in Hong Kong. And so a lot of these Hong Kongers have already committed themselves to the UK. They've sold their properties to fund the move. They've used their life savings. They've prepared their family for a new life in a country that many have never been to.
They are sacrificing a comfortable life and rebuilding it in a place they've never been before.
This house is the result of our hardship. Together we've experienced highs and lows. Especially these few years with our third child, we've experienced some lows. But I hope we can continue on through the hardship and the path ahead.
In the past couple of months, I've had many friends, acquaintances and colleagues ask me for advice on moving to the UK. It seems like just about every other person in Hong Kong is talking about moving to the UK. So, how will things change in the UK? Well, Canada is a good study of how the UK could change. In the late 1980s and the early 1990s, tens of thousands of Hong Kongers emigrated out of the city as they feared what might happen to the territory after the 1997 handover to China. This emigration increased even further after the 1989 Tiananmen Square massacre in Beijing. Canada was one of the top destinations. Just like now, most of those Hong Kongers were educated middle class. As many of them had money, these Hong Kongers could afford to live in fancier neighbourhoods in Vancouver and Toronto.
The early 90s saw a flood of Hong Kong migration and money. The new arrivals investing in real estate.
You could say the Hong Kong Chinese, because many of them came with wealth, education, and were able to walk into the best neighborhoods and buy houses, that desegregated the city in a way in which a government could never have planned and implemented through policy.
Many of these middle-class Hong Kongers had sent their kids to good schools in Hong Kong, so they also sent their kids to good schools in Toronto and Vancouver. And because of their own educated backgrounds, these parents demanded more of the schools in these cities. As a result, many of the schools in Vancouver and Toronto, particularly the private schools, improved greatly. And many of those Hong Kongers were also highly skilled. They arrived and got jobs in white-collar professions or started their own companies, which was of great benefit to the Canadian economy. In fact, the arrival of these Hong Kongers brought about an economic recovery in British Columbia in the early 1990s. Hong Kongers are already buying properties in the UK, a lot of them, in fact, and quite expensive ones. And one of the key concerns that have been raised by Hong Kongers who've asked me about life in the UK is which schools are the best ones to send their kids to. But of course, it would be inaccurate for me to directly compare Canada with the UK. The most popular destination city in the UK for Hong Kongers is likely going to be London, which is a far bigger city in terms of population size than Vancouver or Toronto. London is also already incredibly culturally diverse and many would say a fairly progressive city. Therefore, the impact of Hong Kongers might not be as pronounced as what happened in these Canadian cities in the early 1990s. So perhaps the biggest impact will be felt in some of the smaller, less economically prominent cities in the UK, where a lot of Hong Kongers also plan to move to. Cities like Manchester, Leeds, and even cities in Scotland. I am aware that there are quite a few large WhatsApp and Telegram groups full of Hong Kongers that are dedicated towards discussing the destination cities they are planning to move to. It's these places which might see a bigger economic and social impact from these Hong Kongers arriving, just like in Vancouver and Toronto in the early 1990s.
Oh, ladies first.
After you.
You go first.
After you.
身為英國嘅紳士，遇到女性一定要讓。
One of the things I like to waste time on now is watching YouTube content introducing Hong Kongers to life in the UK. And it would be wrong of me to only focus on the positives. The arrival of Hong Kong immigrants to Canada also brought some negatives. There were some Canadians and even members of the existing Chinese community who were resentful of these Hong Kong arrivals.
The influx of the foreign money, it actually scares me.
Perhaps we could see the same with the existing British Chinese community being resentful of these new Hong Kong arrivals. As I mentioned earlier on, much of the British Chinese community comes from more humble backgrounds in Hong Kong. And now in the UK, there is also a small but sizable mainland Chinese community as well, made up mostly of students and professionals from extremely wealthy families in China. Could there be some friction between them and the new arrivals from Hong Kong? In 2019, for example, there were some face-offs in London between supporters of the Hong Kong protests and mainland Chinese supporters of the Chinese Communist Party. And of course, there is the issue of racism, which unfortunately is still a thing in the UK.
Jonathan Mock, a 23-year-old student from Singapore, was punched and kicked in the face on Oxford Street by a group of men after he heard shouts of coronavirus and told, "I don't want your coronavirus in my country." British-Chinese filmmaker Lucy Sheen was on her way to rehearsals when a white male passenger whispered in her ear on a bus, "Why don't you F off back to China and take your filth with you?" A takeaway owner was spat at and repeatedly asked if he had coronavirus. And in Luton, people have been shouted at from cars, and one woman wrote to me to say that she no longer feels safe and walks about with her mask on and a hood up to cover her face. There were 261 hate crimes against Asians in April, 323 in May, 395 in June, rising each time as lockdown eased. These do not include the number of hate crimes which have gone underreported, so I expect the real figure to be much, much higher.
In the past year, racism towards the East Asian community has increased because of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then of course there is post-Brexit Britain. Some sections of British society will be hostile towards immigrants. There always has been hostility. This is unfortunately something that happens in any country. But in post-Brexit Britain, some people, not all of course, did vote to leave the EU with the understanding that there would be a reduction in immigration to the UK.
Immigration is the number one issue in British politics. 77% of the British public want cuts to the numbers coming into Britain, and over half the voters want a reduction to near zero.
An influx of immigration from Hong Kong might be met with hostility from some of these people. And the biggest issue.
Coronavirus. Coronavirus. Coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus.
Coronavirus. Coronavirus.
We are still in a pandemic-ravaged world, and therefore the UK economy is faltering. So the conditions for these Hong Kongers to become as successful as their 1990s counterparts in Canada just isn't as good. Perhaps with all these negative factors against them, we might see some Hong Kongers fail to carve out a life in the UK. Some might just have to return to Hong Kong. But I do remain largely optimistic about the British public's attitude and reception of these Hong Kongers. The media and the government in the UK has largely portrayed Hong Kong as this former British colony that has been subjugated by the Chinese Communist regime, and that Britain does have a responsibility in helping out these Hong Kongers who can no longer enjoy the freedoms that were promised to them in the joint declaration between the UK and China.
We are not going to turn a blind eye. We're not going to look away for our responsibilities to the people of Hong Kong.
So I expect the British public to be largely receptive and sympathetic to these new arrivals from Hong Kong. And for myself, I'm hugely excited. My view is that these Hong Kong arrivals will make the Chinese community a more prominent group in British society. I'm hoping that British society will take more notice of us, and we will see more Chinese faces in politics, media, and public life. And I'd like to end the video with one last message. To all the Hong Kongers who are preparing to move to the UK, good luck, and I hope it all goes well.
After 3 days of packing and sifting through years of memories, they say their final goodbyes.
I'm quite nervous. It's not the same feeling as going on holiday. We're going to such an unfamiliar place. Who knows what will happen and what challenges we face.
It's not a farewell. Just see you soon.